At the heart of Zambia's economic transformation is a leader whose steady hand and strategic mind is leading the Lusaka Securities Exchange into a new era of relevance and inclusion. Nicholas Kabaso, an experienced executive with deep roots in investment banking and capital markets across Southern Africa, brings global insight and local commitment to his role as CEO of the Lusaka Securities Exchange. From managing one of Zambia's largest mutual funds to chairing capital markets associations, his journey has been defined by a boldness and willing to adapt, lead turnarounds, and embrace change. In this episode of A Seat at the Table, we sit with Nicholas to explore his personal and professional evolution and to better understand the role of the stock exchange in building national prosperity.
All right, thanks very much. My name's Nicholas Kabaso. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Lusaka Securities Exchange. How does leading the exchange feels like now? I must be able to say that leading the exchange has been quite a very fulfilling and rewarding, experience. One thing that I'd want to be able to emphasize is that leading the exchange in these very dynamic times, where we are seeing quite a lot of expectation from regulators, investors, the market in general, and just how the market has to be able to reposition itself, especially looking at the sort of, period of performance I've had in the past, gives you a lot of a deep sense of responsibility, even as you lead the exchange. One thing I must be able to say is that it has been quite a very fulfilling, assignment, looking at the fact that we have to be able to balance between, executing your vision, executing the strategy that the board has approved, and also getting your people to be aligned to be able to perform across some of the performance targets that you have been able to set for them. For me, I think that underlines my experience at Exchange. And I think those are the sort of, reactions I'd be able to give so far in my journey as a CEO at Exchange. Well, I think it dates back to my childhood. I had a very tough, father. And being the only boy child he had in a family of 7, I have got 6 older sisters and 3 older sisters and then 3 younger sisters. And being the only boy child, I think he was not very kind to me. But I think within there, he taught me what leadership is all about. One thing I do appreciate is that he constantly used to use these phrases to me every time when he's trying to counsel me for anything. My son, I'm always not going to be there for you. And you have to get to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. And I think from the time those words were spoken, there was that element of mixed reaction of feelings. There were feelings such as, is my father going to run away from me at some point? Or am I really his legitimate child? So going through those motions after hearing those words constantly in my mind, I'm not going to be there for you. Little did I know that was a leadership lesson he was giving me. And I think straight on from the word go, it gave me to just kick up my survival instincts as a leader. And I think with the passage of time, he taught me how to be as a leader, to be authentic to myself. Because if you're not then authentic to yourself, you will fall and you sleep. But if you're authentic to yourself, failure is not the end result. Failure is always going to be a lesson learned for you then to be able to do what is more going forward. And from that time on, I had to learn these 3 important attributes about leadership. 1, be true to yourself as a leader. 2, leadership comes at a price. And then obviously the last element, you have to be resilient as a leader. And that was obviously what I learned from my father way back. But what was obviously more interesting in his leadership sort of training was a very element of, even though he was telling me constantly, I'm not always going to be there for you, he literally also pointed me in the right direction. In the event that I'm not there, where am I going to get help? And one of the few things that my father really emphasized so much on was reading. He had this attribute of we have to have a reading culture for you to become a better version of yourself. And you'll not be able to believe it, that the first time that I was able to do my bound volume of reading a novel was when I was in grade 5. And from that time on, I started reading very big bound volume novels from grade 5. By the time I was in grade 7, I was able to finish at least over 10 different novels in one given year. And all because my father told me everything that you may need with leadership or anything that I've taught you about or I may not be able to say to you, you will find it in the book. So that clearly helped me to be able to get to learn that for you to be an effective leader, you cannot divorce yourself from reading. Well, I think I would be able to relate the experience when I jumped into the capital markets. It was quite a very radical, unexpected shift coming through from a very lucrative banking career. And I remember the point when I was shifting into the capital markets, my then line manager, Mr. James Coney, had to ask me 3 times, are you really sure you want to move from the bank? And are you sure that this particular move is the best for you? And I think I did mention to him and say, look, I'm more than happy to move and make the shift, away from the banking sector. And I stepped into the capital markets. I was literally taking a leap of faith because I knew for a fact I was getting to start walking in very uncharted waters, but I was ready for the challenge. And I think at the point when we began talking about me moving away from the mainstream banking into the capital markets, I remember double-hatting myself between me being the chief of staff and strategy for the bank and also me then heading the subsidiary for the bank. And I think at the point when all the paperwork were done for me to then transition from the bank into the capital markets and me leading the asset management side of the business, it was very interesting when I had the first appointment with the then board chair for the business. And one of the few questions that she had asked me then was, what are you bringing for us on the table as the CEO for this new business? And I remember having a very light moment when I said, I'm going to grow your balance sheet by over 100%. And interestingly, she laughed in my face and simply said, you seem to be too excited. And I said, no, I understand your business and I know what exactly you need. And I'm the solution that you have before you and I'll deliver. You will not believe it that 1 year later, when I was doing my annual report, I was recording 133% growth on the balance sheet. The business was negative in the time I took it over. The time I took over 1 year later, the business was now turning into black. And by the time I was leaving that particular business, we had grown the business by over 500%. Well, I think there's one thing that I would really want to point out as to what really has happened over the passage of time is me working through people. If there's any sort of stronger accolade that we can then put on the table and say, look, this is what we've achieved, is the very fact that we've been able to create a team that is able to follow through on a strategic direction. It's able to make strategic decisions. And most importantly, we have had a lot of support from the board, to the point where we get a lot of ideas in terms of how we're going to execute the sort of strategy. And you'll not also believe it, that looking at just how we have transitioned from the time that I took over, there's been a lot of goodwill and support from different sort of stakeholders in the market, regulators, issuers themselves, as well as having a lot of investors coming through to my office to be able to just deliberate on how we can then reposition ourselves as an exchange. But most importantly, this has culminated into a very active conversations of active IPOs that are supposed to come to the market. And this is something that we've not seen in the last few years. And if we have to be able to look back in terms of what we're doing now, if you asked me, is the exchange now more active? I'll certainly be able to say yes, because of the number of different conversations actively that we're tracking, where we are potentially seeing IPOs come into the market, and others are also looking at other different sort of products that we're offering on the market, such as bonds, to be able to list themselves on the exchange. That for me is a defining moment for where we are as an exchange, what we're doing, and just focusing on the strategy that we're taking forward is really very helpful. And the most important thing I must be able to underscore is the fact that all these accolades have been made possible because I believe in working through people, and it's people that deliver. If ever I've seen things, beyond what it is that we're doing now, it's because I'm being supported by quite a very good grouping of different individuals, both staff, the board, and also the regulators. And we're all focused on, delivering the results. And that potential is giving us quite a lot of results in view of just what we're seeing in the conversations we're having with different entities that are seeking to come to market. I mean, it's a very interesting observation that you make there when it comes to how people perceive the exchange and how distant sometimes, we feel. But I think the easy way of highlighting the advantages and the existence of the exchange, it dates back to the building blocks on why, the crafters of the whole constitution around why we need an exchange we're thinking about. So if you go back to some of the building blocks that we had at the inception, when the exchange was set up, it was set up first and foremost to be able to allow for wealth creation. It was also set up to be able to allow for the divestiture of government interest in state-owned enterprises. And then it was also set up to be able to help us to improve the corporate governance across the market by allowing a lot of private individuals to be able to participate in these public entities that are coming to market through the initial public offer. Now, if you just look at those particular tenets as to why the exchange was set up, to be able to drive private market participation, to be able to help us then to allow more Zambian individuals to participate in these state-owned enterprises, it already gives you a very valid value proposition as to why the exchange does exist. We do realize that many people are looking for creation of wealth, not only now, but also planning for the future, because we do realize we're not here forever. So if then we have to be able to plan financially, we also must be able to expose ourselves to different sort of, securities, different sort of instruments that we can then be able to invest in to be able to create the needed wealth that we need for ourselves and also for the children that we are preserving wealth for. So having the exchange gives you, the individuals out there, an opportunity for you to buy a stake in the business. So you become a shareholder, you're a part owner to that particular business. So if I invested today in company X, I'm literally telling myself that I've invested my wealth into this particular business. And by participating in that particular business, we are then creating value for the small, medium enterprises. We're also providing that particular motivation for the growth of entrepreneurial ideas. Because as a market, we always believe in the fact that we exist because we're trying to bring buyers and sellers together, those who are selling capital and those who are looking for capital. And that's the reason why if you come to the exchange, you always find these big bold headlines that we have in our offices that we exist because we let ideas meet capital. And that's the reason why we exist. And just that is a very good cornerstone as to why we need to now be able to appeal to you out there, for you then to be able to participate and get involved in participating in the exchange, because by you getting on board, you're also providing that particular needed, benchmark for us to improve the corporate governance in these institutions. Because through these annual general meetings, you air your concerns in terms of how the businesses are structured and how the strategy by these particular management teams is being led to your satisfaction as the owner of the business. So already, just that gives you a lot of incentive as to why we then need to be able to actively participate within the capital markets. But then the next part of your question there is also quite a very valid one. How can we then get close to an ordinary Zambia? Because obviously language about money, capital, sometimes can be quite very daunting on people's minds. I think what we are doing as an exchange, which also helps us then to just leave ourselves a bit down, to get to a common Zambian, is we recently launched what we're calling the Teach 1,000 Learners. We launched this particular, campaign at ZICAS, and obviously what we're trying to target is, can we target those younger groupings to be able to help us then to correct the sort of mistakes that we've seen in the past, where we do not seem to see a very active participation from the older ones. So if the younger ones can then be on board and actively participate in the stock markets, that will help us then to be able to redirect the mistakes that we have seen in the past and help us to get into that particular direction. The beauty also about these younger ones in school is that they're very good ardent readers. They can read about the markets, they can read about what exchange does, and they're able to make positions because they've got a longer, investment horizon. So their participation in our market is more active. So that particular campaign, Teach 1,000 Learners, is helping us then to be able to gain the momentum that we need to be able to attract as many people as possible to the market. You will not believe it that from the time that we launched about 2 months ago, we are currently about 600 outreach in terms of how many we have already reached on. And that's even before we get to midpoint. So that already gives us a lot of, motivation that we're heading the right direction. The other sort of attributes that we're also pushing for to allow us then to be able to get the ordinary Zambian is obviously increased financial literacy. If you look at our, different touch points, our social media pages, and also our website, we're trying as much as possible to condense this information to the most basic level. to allow these individuals to be able to understand what we're doing. And just in a very short while, we must be launching what we're calling the Lucy Academy. And that academy is targeted at helping us then to be able to disseminate courses to the ordinary Zambian. And this can be done from the comfort of your home. And you're then able to learn more about how you can trade and what exactly we do at the exchange. We believe that this particular, assignments that we have will definitely get us in the right space with respects to financial literacy and the outreach that we intend to have with respect to the various people that we're targeting. Well, I think in terms of just leading businesses and myself through times of uncertainty, I would go back to some of the lessons learned from, my father. I think the very aspect that he pushed me out quite at an early age, and having the survival instincts within me, that potentially helped me to be able to learn a lot about how to be authentic, and once you're authentic, no matter how many times you fail, and no matter how uncertain, the environment looks like, you always find your way back. And I think within the complexity of my interactions, the different sort of markets, there's also one thing that I've kind of, come to very much appreciate. It's a very, understanding of why you are doing what you're doing. Now, I always tell different people that if you cannot answer the question why, do not even take the first step, because that becomes your plunge. Once you understand why, it becomes easier for you to redirect yourself, even when goalposts are shifting, or indeed when the dynamics around you are not just, the way they intend to be. So completely underlining your activities with the belief of why that particular aspect is important and what sort of objectives are going to be achieved out of it and why it's important to you and to your business really helps me to then to remain afloat even when dynamics around me seem not to be working in my direction. One thing we do really appreciate is that if you have to look at our strategy is not always going to be a straight throughput. We have to be able to appreciate that strategies can be able to meet different sort of permutations along the way that can take us off course. But understanding why we undertook that particular journey will always give us the resilience that we need for us to be able to just stand up and maintain the course. So if you have to look at the different markets I've been in, I think clearly understanding why we are in that particular situation helps us to redirect the purpose and helps us then to keep our eyes on the ball, as it were, to help us then to keep on the prize in front of us and continue pushing through. So resilience is one of the few attributes that has really helped us. The aspect of being true to yourself, being authentic, also helps us when things are not going your way. You always learn to be able to pull yourself back on and keep on looking at, the bigger, the prize. I think for me, those have been some of the unique sort of attributes I've been able to rely upon, and that potential has given me the tenacity as well as the resilience that has helped me as a leader whenever things are not going my way. I think for me, leadership has, over the passage of time, been heavily diluted with respect to its core values. One of the few things I always try as much as possible to let the individuals I'm dealing with appreciate is the very fact that leadership comes at a price. For you to be a leader, be ready to be able to pay the price. There's no leader that is going to lead without paying the price. And I think it's not going to be an easy journey. We have seen people who have gone before us. They have not had it easy. They have all paid the price. So one of the key instruments that I always try to tell even my team at work is that for you to be a leader, be willing to pay the price. The other element, obviously, is that leadership must be about service. If you as an individual do not want to serve, it will be very difficult for you to lead, because leading itself is serving. You are serving the group of people that you're leading. So service must be at the core of who you are as a leader, and you must be willing to be able to serve. And I think I've got very good examples. Jesus in the Bible did serve his disciples. He washed the feet of his disciples. That's all part of service. So for me, I must be able to get to see that a leader must be one that is willing to go out of his way to serve his people. And I think if you have to be able to serve your people, you then be able to lead them nicely, because that which your people are looking for is that which you're leading on. And that's what you're saving as a leader. So ideally, Be willing to pay the price, because leadership is about price, and also be willing to serve for you to be able to lead your teams very well. And I think for me, those are very useful attributes for a good leader, and one has to be able to entrench these deep in his heart. I think looking ahead, we see the capital markets being very instrumental in the way the entire landscape of our economy is positioned. We do appreciate that within the National Development Plan, we've got very specific mention around how the government intends to be able to downplay their domestic borrowing. The only alternative that they have is a private-public partnership arrangements, and those can only be couched very well on our capital markets. So we see ourselves playing a very pivotal role in trying to lead those particular PPPs on our market, because then the capital markets can then fund beyond where the traditional banks cannot be able to support. The other element, obviously, is the fact that we are seeing a lot of need for us to be able to mobilize domestic savings. Again, the capital markets become quite a very useful tool for us then to mobilize these domestic savings to allow us then to be able to pipe up productivity within the various sectors of our economy. We also must be alive to the fact that there's a lot of concern now about sustainability. Again, we cannot downplay the fact that the capital markets are positioned very well for them to be able to support, the bigger national ambition of trying to be able to create a very sustainable environment. So if you look at your current green bonds that have been very topical of late, already that becomes a very useful, peg you can use to get to see just how very useful the capital markets will be even now and going forward. And then also, there's a lot of need for us to be able to support nature. There's a lot of talk right now about debt for nature for debt swaps. Again, those are instruments that we are positioning ourselves for to help the public, offices, to let them be able to, support themselves to drive quite a very aggressive agenda in trying to create biodiversity that will be very unique to Zambia and allow us then to be able to create sustainability for our market and allow even the future generations to still enjoy the same sort of environment that we're enjoying right now. So looking ahead, these are quite very useful sort of pillars that we're going to be leveraging on for us to be able to support the wider, macroeconomic agenda. But I think, the experience that I've had, over the period of time has really taught me that there's a lot of value internally within the continent. And I think my first exposure when I joined the Namibian team on working on a project, it was a project to do with the One Africa agenda. And one thing that really was very close at heart for me, even in our interaction, is that if we start looking internally or inwardly, we'll then be able to create enough, economies of scale for us then to be able to do business quite very ably. And it also helps us get to appreciate that even as we get to see some of the dynamics around the global space with respect to the economic landscape, it also allows us then to have our own self-introspection that Africa can really be able to stand on its own. If you look at the current tariff wars that we're seeing around the globe, already that is a very rude awakening for us as an African continent, for us to be able to, synchronize our efforts and be able to do trade within ourselves. Because if we can then support one another, we'll then be able to drive the economies of scale, we'll then be able to drive the agenda that is really going to be, effective for our own economies, but also drive their own value that will not be, subjected to external vulnerabilities. Now, one African statement that I like the most, oftentimes when such conversations are coming up, cutting across the border, is one that states that, a baobab tree cannot be hugged just by your own hands. For you to be able to hug a baobab tree, you need the multiple hands to be able to go around it and then hug it. Now, the wisdom contained in that particular statement is one of collective wisdom. For us to be able to resolve the problems we're facing as a continent, we must be able to put our hands together. We also must be able to get to appreciate that these particular efforts are already existing on our continent, on our soil. So if we put our hands together, we collaborate, we'll then be able to create the enough spark that we need for us to drive the agenda of economic growth, for us to drive the agenda of common trade across the countries, and also for us to be able to create enough economies of scale that can position us very competitively to compete with other international markets. For me, that has been one strong lesson I've learned, and I'm looking forward to to seeing an Africa where all of us are going to be trading among ourselves, because the solutions are inward. We have got our own story to tell, and we have to tell it right. And it starts from that collaboration across the different countries, and that will potentially help us to get the next level. So it's a very interesting one, because usually whenever I interact with people, there's always a talk around, but you're a busy man. How do you find time for this? How do you find time for that? But I think I've made it deliberate, point for me to take my weekends to myself. What I normally do is every morning on Saturday and Sunday, I've got my regular routine of doing my own jogging. I also like taking evening hikes. And that helps me to reset my mind, because I can then be able to walk for about even 12 kilometers or to myself, just to reset my mind for the week. And that helps me then to be able to reboost in terms of what I could have lost during the course of the week. I also like taking a lot of time to, read the Bible. I read quite a lot. And I like taking time to pray. I kind of want to anchor, on prayer, because prayer then helps me to tap into that, potential of the power that is beyond me, that can really help me to be able to recharge myself to get back to what is next. And I think it also humbles me, because then I get to appreciate that the more I pray, the more I get to appreciate that I don't have all the power within me. And I have to be modest enough to be able to appreciate that, I've got the grace of the Almighty that is helping me then to be able to live each passing day. And that recognition